2JZ GE inline 6-cylinder engine. And I have recently thought a lot about selling this car because I've had it for 2 years, a little over 2 years now, and this has actually been the greatest car I've ever purchased. I bought it from a one-owner older gentleman with 196,000 miles out of state. He actually flew me, he paid for my plane ticket with his accrued miles to go out, pick me up at the airport in it, sign the title at his house. He handed me a stack of maintenance records. This was the best used car I've ever purchased. I paid $5,500 not quite 2.5 years ago. And it has been nothing short of a dream to drive. Eats highway miles. Absolutely eats highway. I mean, super comfortable. All the power options work. The car was maintained. The original owner replaced the rear main seal and the catalytic converter, and along with a slew of other things, which I had records from going back some years. I've had to do work on it. The only annoying problems I've had with this vehicle have been the brake caliper has failed twice. So I noticed one time I went out like maybe 5 months after I owned it and it was leaking from one of them. I replaced, and then it failed recently and I had to do a full brake job because the caliper seized, and at that point I'm like, I'm just doing the full brake job. Fuck it. This car has been great. Outside of that, fluids, just preventative maintenance, transmission fluid, engine oil. I did the differential once. Trying to think what else. I didn't go heavy with modifications on it. Air filter maintenance, cabin air filter, all the basics. A couple light bulbs. I put an HKS axle back on it. That was something I just wanted to do, didn't need to. But I was like, if I'm gonna own one of these cars at one point, I'm gonna hear the 2JZ, even if it's the NA version. Just wanted to hear a little bit more sound. It was very, very quiet from factory, actually. I changed the resonators to vibrant because the factory ones are very restrictive and muffle the sound quite a bit, which most consumers of this kind of vehicle back in the day probably wanted. I'm trying to think what else. I retinted the windows. It had some lighter window film, probably original. I had that taken off and put 15% and 80 in the windshield. And that, I put 2006 wheels on it off a 2006 GS, and I had those powder coated. But the numb nuts of the tire shops since then have kind of nicked them, and it's a little unsettling. But I didn't go crazy with modifications. One other thing. I put a bigger rear sway bar from Megan Racing on the back. Nothing on the front. Factory springs, factory shocks. And it rides awesome. I have no desire to lower this car. I already did that. And I have no desire to do that. I don't want to make this car uncomfortable. But that neutrals out the handling and makes it a little bit more prone to oversteer, or at least dials out the significant understeer from the factory. So most of the time, cars have a really wimpy rear sway bar from the factory. So for me, this is a very good happy medium. I played with the idea of getting a bigger front sway bar, but I think it's just neutral and good the way it is. It's very mild, So my needs are changing a little bit. When I first got it, I was so in love with this car, and I just find myself wanting something more rugged that I don't have to feel, in a way, guilty about neglecting cosmetically, because the way my lifestyle is, I don't have time to detail a car to perfection every week anymore, and so I do leave it a little bit dirty on the outside. I've gotten older, I just care less. But every time I get in this, I'm just still reminded how excellent of a car this is. I mean, it's so quiet. It drives like a newer car. Like, even though this has 200 and just shy of 213,000 miles on the odometer, it drives so good. Like this car has no real rattles or squeaks or anything. It's so tight. And after I replaced other maintenance items, which I forgot to mention, like upper ball joints and control arms, I had to do one in the rear, and it just handles super good for the amount of mileage that it has. Just the road manners, especially like highway, you couldn't ask for a better vehicle. For the price I paid at $5,500, this is like such a no-brainer. I've really toyed with a 4Runner or a Tacoma because I want to do more like camping and outdoor stuff, and I just want something that's a little bit more rugged, higher ground clearance that I don't have to mess with. And the used car market is insane where I live, and I know everywhere in the US right now. But I'm so conflicted, because it's like, on one hand I get in this and I love it, but on the other hand I'm like, I really want that, but I have a feeling I'm going to regret getting rid of this car if I do that. And I've been considering like a GX 470 too, but I mean, I know the gas mileage isn't that big a difference between the GX and the V8 4Runners and even the 4.0, but it's bad. It's really bad. Like 15 combined. It's kind of hard for me to live with that. I personally love like Lexus and the luxury features that you get, don't get me wrong, but I don't have to have it. I don't have to have heated seats. I don't have to have half the stuff in this car I don't even use. I like leather, but when you're buying an older vehicle, you know, it starts getting questionable. So it doesn't really bother me if I'm buying a truck with cloth interior and fewer options. But I just don't want to regret. That's my biggest fear, is regretting getting rid of this car, because it's been so good to me. I almost feel guilty. That's my problem. I feel guilty because I'm like, this car has been so good to me. I feel guilty. I feel like I've gotten my money's worth now. I drove it all the way back from Tennessee when I picked it up. I've taken it highway so many times, and every time anyone even rides in it, they're like, man, this thing is nice. It doesn't feel like it has near the amount of miles that it does. So, you know, in terms of that, I don't know what I'm going to do, but the GS 300 98 to 05 is a phenomenal vehicle. I mean, Lexus really got it right with these, or Toyota. The only thing I would complain about is the gas mileage isn't good, but you're not buying this car for the gas mileage. It's not good. And in addition to that, if I was in a position, or the same position over again, I would hold out for a 430 or a 400 if you could even find one that was in good shape. I was in a predicament where my 6-speed manual Acura TSX got totaled. Not my fault. I had to have a vehicle like quickly. So when I found this one and it was an original owner, I was pretty much like, at this point, like, dude, I'm just trying to drive to work. Like, I don't really care about, the V8 performance that much. But if you're in a position where you can afford to wait and you can afford to be picky, I would hold out for the 430. It's worth it. The gas mileage hit is like, it's like 1 or 2 difference for a lot more power. So that's my only grievances with this vehicle. Apart from that, it has served me so well, and I absolutely love driving this thing. It is just a perfect commuting vehicle. It drives so well, and I know I've said that, but it's just, I feel like, it's like, and everyone's like, oh, how many miles does your car have? Why don't you get rid of it? Why? It's paid off. Everything works, and it's still cheaper for me to throw $500 at this thing every other year in a failure than it is for a car note. but it's never left me stranded on the side of the road ever. Never, ever, ever. Even when the brakes were warped and everything, I still limped it along. So I highly recommend buying one of these if you can get one that hasn't been obviously like super neglected. It's probably worth your time. If you can get one for a reasonable cost, I would pull the trigger on a GS 98-05. But fantastic vehicles, and I gotta decide if I'm gonna keep it or not. Later.